Bien, buenas tardes a todos. Gracias por asistir a esta primera conferencia que inaugura el ciclo de conferencias, valga la redundancia, que organizamos desde el máster en diseño de experiencia de usuario en ESNE. A lo largo del curso iremos organizando traeremos a diferentes invitados que hablarán de cada una de las áreas específicas del máster, de diseño, de negocio, de innovación, de investigación, etc. E inauguramos esta con una invitada muy especial que después mi compañero Rafael Rebolleda presentará, y con un tema que creo que es enormemente oportuno, The Future of Design, la mirada de una optimista. Trata de desvelar aquellas áreas en las que los diseñadores pueden intervenir ejerciendo una influencia positiva en la sociedad y en todo nuestro entorno. Esto, por supuesto, tiene que ver o es, digamos, es la labor que deben hacer los estudiantes del máster en diseño de experiencia de usuario, pero no solo ellos. Y me alegra ver aquí a estudiantes de primero, de segundo, de tercero, de varias titulaciones, de producto, de gráfico, etc. Creo que es muy idónea para todos nosotros. Bueno, gracias de nuevo por venir y quiero dar las gracias especialmente a Pamela Mead y a todos mis compañeros que han contribuido a hacer posible que viniera, pero no quiero extenderme más y voy a dejar a Rafael Rebolleda que la presente, porque él va a explicar también el papel que Pamela hizo durante su paso por España, también su contribución al crecimiento y al desarrollo del diseño de experiencia de usuario en una gran corporación como Telefónica. Ellos trabajaron juntos y creo que nadie mejor que Rafa para explicarlo. Gracias de nuevo.
Hola, ¿qué hay? Voy a cambiar al inglés para que vayáis calentando un poco el oído y también un poco por deferencia hacia Pamela, ¿no? que ha venido a acompañarnos. So, Pamela came to Madrid in 2009, as we were kind of discussing previously. No? In 2009, I think it was a very different landscape than it is now, almost 10 years later. There were no masters like the one that we're teaching here. There was no training, I'd say, like officially training or even unofficial training. It was very, very difficult to hire people. There weren't that massive pool of hundreds or even thousands of designers that I think we have in a very healthy industry right now in Madrid. So it was a very difficult time, I think, to create a team, which was her mandate, her challenge. But still, I think building the team was perhaps, even if difficult, perhaps the easiest thing of it all. No? I think the most difficult thing that she managed to do was to create a culture within that team, which is, for those of you who've been in a corporation or just with teams anywhere, creating a culture, I think, is amazingly difficult, yet amazingly powerful. And I think she built that around alignment of values and a belief on something. There was a cause, I think, for us there. And it's very easy to say, but it's super challenging to do that. And within that, I'd say I probably have three takeaways in the context of this talk and this audience, which I think one of them is she created a solid structure, with references within it, but also a place where you can learn from everyone, and you could learn in every direction. So you have people with lots of seniority, but they will also nurture and help everyone that was below in the ranks and help them grow, nurture that. And I think that's been amazing to be part of that journey. The other thing is a place where you have to leave your ego behind, and there was a clear sense of, one for all and all for one kind of thing. You were always being helped, and you could always help everyone. And again, very easy to say, super difficult to execute in somehow a hostile environment like a corporation. I think the last thing, and not perhaps the less important thing, is the embodiment of the can-do attitude. No, the fact that you can achieve this thing, you can really change the mindset of these people, and perhaps the embodiment of the work hard and party hard. Have fun while you're at it, and enjoy the rewards of fighting a good fight. So I don't know, I think I speak for some of my colleagues, some of the former workers here, and all the team that was lucky to share a few years with Pamela. That it's an amazing pleasure to have you here, sharing your thoughts with us. So please welcome Pamela Mead.
Thank you. Wow, that's an introduction. Very dear to my heart. I'm going to speak English. I was going to say German. English. I did have a cup of coffee just before I started, but I am going to try hard to speak slowly. I do ask, if I start on a roll and I'm speaking really fast, get my attention, I will slow down. And if I say something that you think is really important and you really didn't get what I just said, please, interrupt and feel free to make me stop and say it again, okay? So, hold on a second, I'm going to take off my earring. So I want to talk to you today about a couple of things. I want to talk to you about why I believe now is one of the most exciting times to be a designer. And I really say that from the bottom of my heart, and I will try to convince you the same thing in the course of the next few minutes. I will be doing so by also sharing with you what are some of the trends that we need to be, and topics that we need to be grappling with that will significantly impact the world that you will be designing in. I will talk to you about the challenges that we face in doing so, and Rafa alluded to that a little bit in terms of what's happening inside of companies. And then I want to leave you with 6 principles that I believe if you can hold on to them and really practice your skill and your talent from those 6 principles, you can achieve a lot. So, as Rafa said, I'm Pamela. I'm now living in Berlin as a strategic consultant. I think of my career in sort of 2 parts. The first half I spent in consulting, working for some of the premier design consulting firms in the United States, creating pretty forward-looking solutions for Fortune 500 companies, which included Barclays, Harman Kardon, Hallmark, Amoco, McDonald's, some of the really, really big companies. And then I decided to go and work inside of companies, in part because I wanted to really work on the forefront of technology, and that was difficult for me to do in consulting. Plus, I really wanted to see products go to market, and I really couldn't see that happening from a consulting space. So I worked at hardware. I started with Palm, because I really want to get a mobile. With Yahoo, I ran a global design team in the mobile space, which was pre-iPhone. And then eventually, after a startup and spending some time at Intuit, I was being convinced to go to the dark side, because up to that point, we always thought the telcos are the bad guys, and figure out what is going on in telcos and how can we really actually have telcos be part of this amazing future of customer-focused innovation. So I came to Telefonica, spent 6 years here, and then joined Here Technologies, which deals with mapping technology and location services, which is at the heart of a lot of the different trends that I'll be talking about in a little bit. So when I talk about this being an exciting future, I actually go back to my studies. I have a master's in design from the Institute of Design in Chicago. And when I started, it's almost 30 years ago, I don't really want to admit, we were talking already about just-in-time printing, just-in-time manufacturing. We talked about smart and connected devices and objects, and we talked about what does it actually mean to have metaphors that are not actually just mirroring the world that we currently know. And it really led me to a place where I was passionate about creating the future. I didn't just want to be a designer. I didn't just want to figure out how to use computers. I wanted to be engaged with technology in a way that allowed me to shape what technology would mean in our lives. And that's really been at the heart of hearts what has been motivating me as I've been moving through my career. And quite frankly, this is now. This is when we actually can do the things that we were talking about that long ago. So I emphasize that I'm a designer because we've gotten very confused with all the different terminologies. But I think it's also really important to just come back to who we are as designer and really own that in the base of what we're doing. Of course, when I studied design, actually nobody even knew really what design was. People thought I was either in fashion design or in interior design. Actually, I studied something called commercial art for 2 years before I really went into my master's and discovered something that was called user experience design. Because at the time, technology was actually just starting to hit both the design world and also the consumer world. And at the time, a lot of the designers that I was studying with were incredibly afraid that this technology was going to eliminate some of the entry-level jobs for designers, which was doing key lines and doing really traditional work. And the reality is, yes, it did. It changed it. But it also opened up a whole career for me in user experience design and now service design that really wasn't even taught at the time. So I embarked with my master's on software development. I worked on interactive CD-ROMs, on interactive laser discs. And of course, eventually, we also dealt with the web, which was very static. But now, over time, it's really become this incredibly dynamic platform, if you will, where we can find anything and everything that we've ever wanted to know. The technology is making the experiences increasingly smart, increasingly connected, and increasingly more valuable. This year, we've celebrated 10 years the 10-year anniversary of the iPhone, and as I mentioned earlier, I did quite a bit of work and even won some awards pre-iPhone days. But I have to say that launch really did change a lot of things. It put computing power into people's pockets. It put an incredibly well-designed device into executive hands. And it really led us to a space where we are now, where we just expect everything to be connected, to seamlessly be working together, where we can go from starting a project in one device and then move on to the other, and it seamlessly fits together. Or we can use both at the same time. As we learned in our video research, 80% of the time people watching videos have a handheld of some form with them, and they're either looking up information about what they're watching, or they're chatting with friends about what they're watching, or they're actually co-consuming something. So the world is quite connected, and it's so connected that what is real and what is not real is actually blending a little bit. There have been a couple of studies released recently that talk about the fact that we cannot differentiate anymore between what we actually know versus what we just read on our phone. So we believe what we just read on our phone is actually our knowledge, but it's really not. It's just something we just read. Similarly, I thought this study was really interesting. They wanted to see what influence mobile devices have on people's ability, people's test scores and ability to take tests. And as long as a mobile device is in the room, even if it is at the opposite end of the room, your test scores are affected negatively. So, these devices have a lot of power over us, and it leads to some really interesting debates about the ethics of design. I don't agree with a lot of them, But a lot of conversations are now emerging of what responsibility do we have to consumers if we're building things that are engaging and potentially in that context addictive. Apparently, in the course of a year, teenagers spend the equivalent of 40 days on their devices. So a lot of our focus has now been absorbed by these connected devices, and to the point where people are really not feeling isolated and feeling left out, even though they're sitting in a group of friends. So it's an interesting time. However, I don't believe that technology is necessarily at fault or designers are at fault. I believe we as people, as individuals, have responsibilities for ourselves and our actions. However, it is a dialogue that we need to be thinking about. And when I get excited about the future of some of the invisibility of the technology is I believe we can create a future where we go back to living in the world, but with more intelligence embedded in our environment. And I'll get to that a little bit more. So the convergence of the real world and the technical world is happening very rapidly now. We talk about augmented reality. Imagine when you hold up your phone, you can get additional information about your environment, or even better, rather than having to, when you get out of the metro, rather than trying to figure out which way is that little blue dot pointing, if you can actually hold up your phone and it gives you the arrow of like where you need to be. So there's quite a few really valuable applications, including IKEA claims that it's saving marriages by allowing people to pre-plan where their furniture are going to go into their environment. And of course, it is a really great tool for training and for troubleshooting. If you've not driven cars with what's called a heads-up display, I will tell you your driving experience will never be the same. It's a projection on the screen. It's really actually only in the driver's field of vision that usually gives you a speed limit, the speed that you're going, and if you have a navigation scheme, it tells you which way to turn. The future, the visions for these cars is that they're going to be a lot bolder, like we're showing here, so you can really see in a really clear way where you need to be going and where you need to be driving. There are also some examples on the internet where there's actually interactive parts of the display on the windshield. I'm not completely convinced that's going to happen or that that's particularly useful, but it certainly is useful when you start having a person show up on the left side of your display because somebody's actually starting to cross in the street and they're in your blind spot and you can't see them. So this is already happening. So augmented reality is really part of the vocabulary, if you will, that we will be designing with. And of course, a lot of conversation now is around autonomous and self-driving electric cars. Excuse me. I'll be very frank with you. When I was still here in Spain, I thought there was a lot of Google hoopla. Then I went to here and I realized that this is real. The technology and the data that mapping data that here has is in already 80% of the cars, and all of the OEMs are very much looking at what to do with all the sensor data and how to build the intelligence into it. And the reality is some of the higher end cars already have what's called stage 2 automation, where cars are self-parking, and there's a lot of the automation and in terms of the distance that the car keeps or the speed that it's going that's already in the cars. Further, there's a lot of trials going on. It will be a while, and I'll talk about that in a minute, before we really have a whole environment that's self-driving. But there are things like commuter buses in dedicated lanes that are already starting to be used in Silicon Valley. This is a trial in Las Vegas, on the Strip, where it's stopping and self-driving. It doesn't have actually a driver anywhere in the car. And there's trials going on all over the world in this space. On top of that, of course, almost every car manufacturer has committed to have both electric and self-driving cars by about 2025 in some capacity. Now, why stop at cars on the road if you can actually control the skies? So, of course, Uber has already announced that they are going to do a trial in 2018 for a still piloted commuter flight, Their plan, though, is by 2025 to have worked out what it actually means to be flying in the skies and the traffic in the skies. But their intent is to have an Uber experience for people from rooftops in centers of cities to like certain destinations, including airports. Airbus is planning on doing the same thing. This is a bit of the futuristic version. This is actually, if you look it up on the video, this is actually a sort of a car component that becomes a flying component. But Airbus as well has already announced that they want to have trials in 2018 for some of their flying taxi services. So while it might seem far in the future, I believe it's really a lot closer, and we're going to hit the tipping point of it sooner probably than we think. What is actually interesting for us as designers, however, is the time between now and whenever we figured out all this automation, which will probably be 2030, 2035 or some future, because between now and then we have to deal with the complexities of some automation, some non-automation. There are people that nobody talks about when the executives get really excited about not needing any more stop signs or street lights. What about the people who are on the street, or the bicyclists? They may not be that connected. They may not have the same information. So the world between now and then is going to be really, really interesting and really complex, because you also have to deal with the psychology of a changing environment. Not only in the car, which in of itself is a really significant design challenge, but also outside of the car. So really, really interesting, really exciting, and I will tell you the automotive manufacturers still don't quite get it. So very, very interesting space to be involved. Of course, part of what we're talking about is the environment and cities becoming smart. And even here, I think we have a long ways to go to think about people in cities. There's a lot of conversations about efficiency, about getting sensors distributed so we know when to pick up the garbage, about traffic flow. Again, very operational, very efficiency, and very money-saving oriented. But if you think about the future and we really start to think about it from a people perspective, how would we actually start to think about what a smart city is really going to be like? And I think there's going to be a lot of work that still needs to happen for these dialogues to start to materialize. Once we see these experiences to be smart, I believe we're going to start to move towards experiences that I call magical. And we have already a little bit of that today. Now I think it's magical. The first time Google knew where my car was parked, I was a little bit disturbed. But we do get used to it. And that's actually one of the really interesting things of technology. If it adds value to our experience, we become quite generous in accepting that value that it adds. So magical, one place to look at what the future could be like is actually Disney World. Who has read about the Magic Band, the Disney Magic Band? Okay. Some of you. I'll try to stay reasonably high level. It's actually quite interesting. I think it was 2008 where the executives said, how can we remove the most friction from the Disney experience? Because there's friction. There's lots of lines in the rides, trying to run across the park to figure out where was the next ride that your kids actually wanted to be able to see. So I think it's a great problem statement. Remove all friction so people could really come and enjoy the Disney experience in its ultimate. And in addition to all the sensors that are now in the Disney park, it's this little device that's actually the key in the magic. It has an RFID tag, RFID in it, inside of it, as well as sensors that project the location up to 40 feet. Sorry, I read it in English. So 40 feet, and communicates with their environment. So if you decide to go to Disneyland with your family and you buy a ticket and you sign up for Magic Express, is what it's called, then a couple of amazing things happen. First of all, you already get these wristbands sent to you. So everybody in the family already has it before they even get on the plane. They come in different colors. They can easily get sized. There's a tremendous amount of design work in getting just the hardware to work in a way that makes it really easy for you to adjust. So it works for a kid as well as for an adult wrist. When you get to the airport, your luggage gets tagged. When you get off the plane, you don't have to wait in line. You get on a Disney bus, you get driven to the Disney World. You don't even have to check in because you're already checked in. And you can just start enjoying the rides. If you spend any time pre-planning which rides you want, you already have the perfect route lined up. And because they know where people are in the park, they can really guide you to the rides that where you don't have to wait. So the whole experience becomes a lot more seamless, and you can really focus on the joy of the experience. Your luggage gets delivered to you and magically into your room. And this opens up the door. It allows you to pay. It's of course connected to the master credit card somewhere. And kids, it does lead to the impulse buying, if you will. If your kid really opens up its eyes and says its promise is going to be good for the next year, you get soft and you say yes, and of course it's almost automatically purchased. And the other part of the experience that's magical is any time in the day you can order your lunch or your dinner. When you go to the restaurant, you get greeted by name by a hostess. You can sit at any table, and magically within roughly 5 minutes your meal arrives. Because what happens as you start approaching the restaurant, the waitress gets a notification in her device who's coming. The kitchen gets notified that the people who have already placed the order are coming, and it gets queued up. And then when you sit down, the restaurant knows where you're actually sitting, and the food gets delivered to you. So it's magical because it happens very, very seamlessly. And of course, in the context of magic of Disneyland, it's a very contained, environment, and we get so much value out of this experience that we don't worry about what that would mean in the rest of the world. But it really allows people to focus on the flow of the experience and come back to being with the people and enjoying the experience. So it's an interesting example. We at Telefonica cared about this example really deeply because we were working on an innovation concept that was embedding authentication in a wristband and was dealing with behavior. So we thought this is actually a really good indication of what could happen in the future. Now, part of what's magical is the idea of invisible experiences. And if we start to look ahead towards intelligence in objects, then there doesn't need to be a screen necessarily associated with it. So right now, the Amazon really is, I would say, the lead in moving us into a direction where voice as an input and as a feedback mechanism, as a way of interacting, is becoming really natural. How many of you have one of these or a smaller one in your home? How is it? Do you have one? It's good. So I had it wrapped. A friend of mine gave me one, and I had it wrapped up for, I think, an embarrassing 6 months because I didn't know how difficult it was going to be to set it up. It turns out it's really, really easy. And what is delightful about it are actually the seemingly banal interaction that it makes lovely. So a timer. I don't know how many, it's in the kitchen, so my hands are full. I'm always looking for my phone. Where is it? Can I set the timer? I just tell Alexa, timer, 20 minutes. I can set multiple timers. It tells me if I want to know how much time is left on the timer. So it's one of our favorite utilities of this thing. My daughter, who's 14, her home duty is to do the dishes, and now she's playing her favorite music. So I'm learning about my daughter's music taste, and we start to have a lot more dialogue in the kitchen around music and around different topics. So Amazon is really quite interesting. Of course, Google is doing similar things with their devices, but I think by far Amazon is ahead because a lot more of the developers are contributing what are called skills to this ecosystem. The reason we haven't used more is because we're using an English version on a German Amazon, and that doesn't give us all the compatibility, but I'm going to switch that and help my husband learn German a little bit faster. So Amazon, though, is not at all interested in just being expert at voice. They actually have the ambition to move into a completely new paradigm that makes smartphones irrelevant. So they're going to be launching this Echo Spot, is what this one is called, and then there's an Echo, I want to say Echo Picture, but it's another device with screens. But the idea that you can start to really distribute them in different parts of your house. And you know, when you wake up in the morning, you can dismiss this, you get the weather, it will open the blinds or turn on light, whatever you have sort of decided is how you want to be waking up, it can do automatically. If you go in the kitchen, Alexa can tell you about the traffic, the weather, or your appointments. And if they do get into the cars, then it can remind you about what you need to be doing in terms of picking up any groceries, or maybe it will just deliver the groceries for you, because with Amazon Key, they can now get into people's homes. So Amazon the ambition of Amazon is to be this ingredient that really facilitates making a lot of your life a lot simpler. Whether Amazon will win, Google will win, Apple, we don't quite know yet. But the reality is that this is not about voice, this is not about this box, it's about really starting to be an integral part of your life in a very seamless and invisible way. So I want to finish this section with a highly recommended reading. It's a friend of mine, David Rose, who wrote this book called Enchanted Objects. He has a really lovely introduction. He has a nightmare that he describes in great detail, which is that the whole world will be just this glass slab, because most companies are still very much in love with glass everywhere and everything has to be an app. And he narrates the story of his grandfather's workshop, where he had all these tools, all these chisels that all had a specific meaning, and there was a story associated with everything. And he talks about how can we bring that back? How can we imbue our everyday objects with a bit of magic? He has a very convincing theory that we as humans have had aspirations, magical aspirations, for centuries, and they're all captured in our fairy tales. They include omnipresence, being everywhere, teleportation. I forget that there's several of them, and I forget them all the time. Omnipresence, teleportation, telepathy, expression, self-expression, and I think a few more. But read them, because as designers, they're great for us to think about. First of all, some of this is real. With Skype and some of these others, we can be in two places almost simultaneously as if we're in the same space. But then, if you can think about designing your objects, your experience with a little bit of this idea of magic, what could those experiences really be like? So, highly recommended. It's all about invisible design, which means that we have to come up with completely new languages for what is an experience like when you don't have a screen, you don't have something you touch. Maybe it's not even voice, but you're designing with sound, you're designing with light, you're designing with completely different factors. So, to do all of this, design needs to go deep into technology. When I was studying, I actually learned how to program artificial intelligence. Didn't really do me any good, except that I could talk to engineers. And I knew that my code was always this long and the experts wrote it that short. But it was really quite important. Then for about 10 years, design really focused on learning about business. And I would say now is the time that designers have to get back into knowing the technology. We have to be working in the technology. We have to be influencing it. One of them is platforms. A lot of companies are becoming platform companies. And what's really interesting is when you actually design platforms, it's not just the interface for the business to the developing community that's going to be using whatever platform it is, whether it's the Amazon platform or for here was location-based services. I mean, that is just an interface in of itself. But we actually need to be thinking about what do these developers want to do? What services do they want to provide? And what are the needs of these customers? Because if we don't enable that in the platform, then they really can't be building what they want. And of course, you think about partners, and need to think about, anticipating the needs, anticipate the potential, look at what people are actually trying to do and how that can influence the technology and the platform, and then where do you create value? That's not usually what we think about, and by the way, that same applies to almost any object these days that is connected to the cloud in some way. What data, what value can it create that maybe somebody else can use? The other part is data. Data is the new oil, as they say. There's a lot of conversation around how data helps us in design. I would actually argue that we're still, both we, when I say we as designers or even as product people, are really terrible at what I call instrumenting our products. We're not very thoughtful about what data we're gathering, and so there is this illusion that just because it's data, it's real, which of course isn't really necessarily true. So a lot of work needs to be done here, and of course when we start thinking about what this data can drive, then we start looking at personalization and customization, and this idea that we as users do expect that the technology has some level of intelligence. I'm incredibly angry and impatient with Booking.com that they can't even remember that I'm trying to search for a hotel with a pet. But Airbnb has at least the intelligence that they're really paying attention, so when you go to Airbnb, it knows what you generally search for, and it makes suggestions that are really meaningful in terms of what the overall patterns are. So we're going to have to spend time with the data to understand what are actually really meaningful ways in which we interpret it, so that if any company, any product knows who we are, what our history is, what our behaviors are, what our contexts are, what is really a meaningful personalized experience. And we as designers have to be in there driving that. It's really, really important. So data is going to be one of the topics you really have to look at. And then the third one is machine learning and artificial intelligence. I'll talk a little bit in a minute about a professor of sociology at the School of Economics in London. Her name is Jane Watchman. She has a couple of really interesting quotes. She says, "The technology reflects the creators." So if we think about who's building all these intelligent systems and all this machine learning, right now a lot of it is coming from the West Coast. And West Coast engineers, all the stereotypes that you may have associated with it, a lot of that's being built into these machines. So we need to get in there and actually influence it. My one anecdote from here is that we have a search algorithm, of course, for location. And the team was coming to us to have us look at their human-assisted machine learning process. And when we started to look at the questions, the processes, who was deciding what was a good result versus a bad result, there was no context. It was a very engineering-oriented mindset that was driving the evaluation of the results. So guess what? The search results aren't necessarily very meaningful because it misses a whole side of the human context that really goes in evaluating whether a result is meaningful or not. So we have to be in there. We have to actually help shape this world because it's going to be at the heart of what we're going to be doing going forward. So design, of course, if you believe everything that I've said so far, then design is not just what it looks like, what I call the tip of the iceberg, the look and feel, the visual elements, the interaction patterns. For companies, these are very much tactical drivers for their business. We make things look a lot better, so they become a little bit more successful. But really what we need to do is if we start to look at systems in companies, because rarely does a company just do one product, then we need to start to look at design patterns and toolboxes so we can start to drive some efficiency across an organization. So one organization isn't repeating or building the same thing as another part of the organization is. And ideally, we actually make some headway and we start to apply what we're calling now design thinking, but really applying design as a problem-solving vehicle so we can start to deal with much more complex topics and really bringing the human perspective to the conversation. That requires for us to work across organizations, which is why this becomes more of an organizational driver and more of a driver of change. And then really, at this point, people like John Maeda are actually quite passionate that we need to start to get into what he calls computational design. We have to start to get into the technology and start driving the conversation at that level, because what is being engineered in what I call the bowels of these platforms is what enables us to do great experiences. And I have another anecdote from here. A gentleman who was running the routing team in the platform side said to me, okay, we're writing all these algorithms for what is the best route. And my team is giving you the best route. One route, but it's the best. And he said, but you know what? I think they are really far removed from the end user. So how can we really bring a little bit of that perspective to their way of thinking and working? Because if you, as a user, if you do, look for an address on Google and you get one route, do you believe that's the best route? The first time? Maybe the 10th time. But the first time, you want to actually get a couple of routes, because your best route might be different from mine. Like, if you just learn how to drive, you want to avoid the highway at all costs. I want to get there fast, right? So what is actually best isn't necessarily the same for everybody, or the same all the time. So it changes. So that level of dialogue needs to happen here, because what they enable at the API level is what allows you to do up here. So this is incredibly important, and this is why I believe we as designers need to get back and getting really comfortable with technology. Now, having said that, how am I doing? Okay. That's easier said than done. And that's not because we can't do that. We can't commit to doing it. The reality is that companies don't quite understand why we should be doing that. A lot of companies, when they start to build design teams and design organizations, they can sort of understand this. As a matter of fact, a lot of agile teams just want you to do this. So eventually we can get them to understand, okay, we can save money if we can do patterns, if we can build some level of efficiency with toolkits. Somebody might fall in love with the idea that Post-its are a really, really good tool and fall in love with design thinking, even though they don't really understand it. But this is really, really difficult to convince people. So it is something as leaders we have to continue to do. And certainly you as designers need to get really smart at this, because in your day-to-day work, you have to convince and be in the engagements and ask the questions so that the engineers start to come to you and say, help me think through this. So that is one of the ways in which we need to get through this challenge. This is a good way to think about design within organizations. I would say sort of different levels of design maturity. I've been listening to several really interesting podcasts or YouTube videos for high resolution. I would suggest look them up. They've interviewed, I think, 20 or 25 VPs of design from different companies. And in about the 9 that I listened to, there was absolute agreement that maybe there's a handful of companies that have design in their DNA. So most of them are somewhere on the spectrum. Let's say a lot of them are here. I think at Telefonica we had blips where here we certainly still have a few teams that function down here. But this is a really hard one, getting to this strategic level. And that certainly requires that the companies that you are working for that see the importance of it and bring design leadership into the company at the highest level possible, ideally at the what we're calling the C-suite, part of the executive committee. Another interesting challenge that we have is organizational structure. It actually exists in not only the big companies like Telefonica and probably BBVA and all these really big organizations, it actually existed also at here. So it's It's still very typical, even though there's a lot of conversations organizations have to fundamentally change. And I've been told that this is a really good way to explain it to executives because they sort of get it. A typical Apple product, really simple, one touch. Google product, simple search bar. And then most companies look like that. And the reason they look like this is because they actually function in silos. Because these different parts of the organization simply aren't willing to talk to each other, either because it's power. They're just not incentivized to be playing nicely with each other. And yes, the incentives really force them to focus on the financial and KPI successes of their particular organization, and they're really not incentivized to actually help any other part of the organization. So it's extremely difficult, and we learned a lot about that at Telefonica. If you ever wondered why, in heaven's name, customer service is so poor in the Movistar stores, well, when we were looking at it, I think it was about 3-4 years ago, some of the customer service people, they have to deal with 9 platforms to serve one customer. So they're not set up, even if they want to, they're not set up to really be successful. But it's a huge problem, and it's one of the things that every company is really grappling with. And the way they're grappling with it is by starting to look at at empowered teams. I will talk a minute about Agile, but the idea is that you have this triad working together. Now, this is usually where it stops. You have product people, engineers, and designers sort of working together. But really what should happen is that you have people from other disciplines be embedded so that the teams really become more truly self-contained. Because the business person and finance and all of them, they shape what you create. And by having them be removed, they're not incentivized to really work together, and they can't contribute their perspective to the process. Now, the problem, though, with this, in the companies that I've worked at where they're really doing this, especially at here, is, okay, now you're empowering all these people to make their decisions, and the executive committee isn't acting in any way like you're asking the teams to be acting. So there's a huge disconnect. So why should we be behaving this way if what the executive team is doing is backstabbing each other and not cooperating? So it's a big topic. Now, what can you do about this? You can't do much about that. That's what I need to deal with. But you can really keep working at the team level to hold true to the values that you have and really keep embodying the level of collaboration that's really at the heart of doing great products. What is important, though, is you need to know that in the company that you go in, be aware and don't be so frustrated, because it is frustrating when you're trying to do the right thing and everybody around you is not doing the right thing. And I'm looking at Josemi, who can tell you stories if you want to talk to that young man there. He's still going strong, believing. But it's really hard. So you need to know that and understand that that might not be the thing you can fix, but then figure out what you can learn and what you can do in the environment that you're working in. My favorite topic. So how many of you are aware of agile engineering practices? Okay. If you don't know yet, you probably will, because agile is beginning to be everywhere. Who knows about lean startup? And then, what's the third one? Oh, design thinking. You all know design thinking, right? Hopefully you know design thinking. Well, these are 3 disciplines. Get this book. Read it, 55 pages. Very, 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 very simple reading, really fast, over a vino or coffee. Jeff Gothel, he really does a great introduction on what the history is of lean, of design thinking, of agile, and why in most companies that are really happy that they have these different practices going, that actually doesn't work, because they're not really working together. And the dominant discipline is by far agile, because engineers are at the end of the day the ones who really make it happen. And the reason I'm on a mission, I don't have an answer yet, but I'm on a mission with this one, because I've spent now 8 years badgering my teams into doing agile right, being in only 4? I've done it for longer than that. 40, thank you. I need to finish. It doesn't work for design. It reduces our design activities to really pragmatic, really tactical, do the visuals dialogue. We can do sprint zeros, we can do design sprints, we can do all of these pieces, but it doesn't really lead to us working together. So I call it dogma because every one of these individual groups has religion about their particular process, and we need to get rid of the religion and really figure out how do we actually work together so it's truly a collaborative process from the time you actually figure out what you're trying to build to the actual building process, to the learning from it. And it's there's a fair amount being written about it now. So I'm sure there will be a manifesto 2.0, and if I can by any way, I'll participate in writing it. So the last challenge is speed. Speed is virtue. It goes right along with agile. Everybody's like, just get it into market, learn, pivot, fix, go out. Now, I've worked enough in agile that very rarely do we pivot enough. Very rarely do we actually do the second part of the MVP. But it's an important part. I'm having a fair amount of discussions because it is now so ingrained into this high-tech culture. Speed is the metric by which innovation and progress is evaluated. And again, this is the woman I was referring to earlier. Do look her up. She has a lot of really great presentations. Our perception of speed is actually no different than it was in the Industrial Revolution. Only it's beginning to have a different interpretation. It's very social. She very much makes it clear that speed is not a technical problem. Speed is a social problem. And it's a really interesting example, and I was thinking about this. There is a book that Google executives wrote, and they talk about the overwork in a good way, which is an interesting concept, but the mindset in Silicon Valley is very much you got to work really long hours and work every weekend, and that's how you win your badge, and that's how you're successful. In one of her presentations, she has the opposite, an interesting example for the automotive industry in Germany that is actually similar to Spain, very protective of personal time. And people don't read emails on the weekend. And there is apparently, there was a blog written about at Daimler. If you go on holiday and somebody sends you an email, you get an email back, and actually I've had that happen, now I understand why, that says, this person is on holiday, your email will be deleted. If it is important, send it when they're back. So, very different culture. Now, I've lived in Spain for 6 years, and I know the importance of family and personal space is really part of the culture of Spain. So I would love to see what speed could mean in a culture that also values personal time, but where clearly being competitive and being fast and being determined is part of what will be important for success. By the way, I still hold religious on Fridays. I try to have no meetings after 3 o'clock. So even though I work, I really believe it should be the Zen time. So now, getting to the future, a couple more things and then I'll be wrapped up. I call these 6 principles that I believe are really define us as designers. And if we can believe in them, if we can hold to them, if we can act with integrity from them, they can help each and every one of you move forward in your careers and be effective towards building the future that we're talking about. So one, in all of the conversations about design and the titles and the roles, and is it service design, is it UX design, is it UI design, and there's going to be probably more, we have to come back to what is really at the root of who we are as designers, which is we solve problems. And if we can stay true to that, then first of all, no problem cannot be tackled by you because you have the fundamental tools for solving problems. Certainly I can speak for myself. I've rarely ever gone into a new job and knew exactly what I was going to be doing. There's always a lot of inventing, a lot of figuring out. But if you have your toolkit that you really understand, then you can invent from that and really adapt and shape. And we'll have to do a lot of that because the world we'll be designing is different from the world we live in today. I really believe this, although I understand not everybody acts collaboratively. But I believe design, if we really believe it's about problem solving, is fundamentally a collaborative discipline. That means a couple of different things. You need to collaborate with people who have different skills, with engineers, with product people, with anthropologists, with DevOps people, with finance people. You really need to understand them and need to learn how to communicate with them and need to bring them into the problem-solving dialogue. In all of those podcasts that I listened to, there's another theme that was absolutely universally expressed, which is the era of the individual design hero is gone. The problems we're solving are too complex. The rate of change is too fast. There is no way that any individual can really solve it. So that this is the time that when it's the team that is the hero, which is why what Rafa was saying was really so important, because none of us individually can do it. So take that forward with you and really think about who are the people you need to collaborate with. And if it's not just disciplines, also what's important is people from different backgrounds. You know, so how can you really keep bringing new perspectives into how you think about the problem and how you arrive at solutions? When we talk about design thinking, I sometimes get annoyed, in part because I've been in sometimes ridiculous conversations around everybody suddenly being a designer. That's not true, but people need to understand the mindset to be able to collaborate with us and solve problems. But as designers, I believe we have some unique superpowers that you learn in universities like here. We can do one thing that most others can't. We can really create and make real and make tangible all the stuff that people talk about. You know, we can shape it through a sketch. We can shape it through a storyboard. We can create a couple of amazing screens that all of a sudden makes the magic be tangible, as opposed to having tons of bullets on a page that everybody in the room interprets differently. So remember, you do have actually some skills that I call superpowers that others may not have, that you bring to the conversation, and grow them. Grow your superpowers, because that's going to be the piece that you will contribute to collaborative work environments. So inherently in our superpowers is storytelling, but I also want to say that one thing as designers, and I will put myself into this, is that we get really focused on our work, and we are not very good talking about our work. If I can take one thing from consulting, you've got to figure out how to convince that client that what you've just presented is actually the best thing since sliced bread. So you need to learn how to tell stories about your work. You need to be able to convince people that what you've created is the best thing. And you need to convince them so much that they are actually willing to engineer it to the perfection that you've designed and envisioned. So tell stories to executives, walk the hallways with your designs, engage with people, convince people, get those engineers to want to come to you and have you work with them. So telling stories is really, really, really important. Another interesting point from these podcasts is this idea that design needs to stay humble. A little bit of dialogue is an English word called hubris, a little bit of arrogance that we can sometimes have, because we're the ones who have the right answer. It's sort of the other side of collaboration is we're right and they're wrong. So be humble. We don't have all the answers. We do need to work with people. And one of the quotes is really, I think it's from John Maida. When you start to put being humble together with curiosity, you really have a magic combination. And I really love this quote, which I do think is part of our problem solving, is being really curious and learning and understanding other people's perspective and bringing that together in a way that's humble, while we also need to be really grounded in what we know and why we're doing what we're doing. So this is one I've just added this morning. Thinking about some of the interview questions earlier today, design, you're never done learning. And especially when we start talking about a future where there's a lot of technology that's coming, that's going to be changing the world that we are living in, we need to keep engaging, we keep learning. If one of the questions was, how did I get from my studies to here? well, I continuously put myself almost on the bleeding edge of the next big thing. And that required a lot of learning. It required a lot of commitment to being outside of my comfort zone and putting the time in to figure out how to actually do that thing. But if you do that, then you have a career for the rest of your life, because you'll be riding that wave rather than the wave swallowing you. That also means that you need to put yourself into environments where you can do that learning. So that can be part of your thinking as you go into the working world. The World Economic Forum just published this, worth a read. It talks a lot about the future where we don't really own anything. Everything is shared, everything is rented. You don't really need to go shopping anymore because it's not about buying and ownership. It's just about sort of renting, and the algorithms can choose things for you. And the world is perfect because there are no more traffic jams. But by the way, privacy, I don't know what even they say. Why is it even important? Maybe that sounds a little bit like Disneyland. I don't know. Is that the future we want? I don't think I want to be there, but that is a possible future. So when I talk about why is it a great time to be a designer, it is because we need to be involved in these conversations. This is the time when we can start to create magic. And the world will around us will evolve in the way we can shape it, and we need to be a part of it. So I really believe smart cities, we need to think about people. We need to bring the people dialogue into these conversations. When we talk about creating magical experiences, there's a lot of technology that's currently engineered. We need to give it the human element so that it really is something that we want to be part of our life. It means that we have to create completely new languages, and we need to engage in that. And I actually believe we have maybe not moral, but I think we have an obligation to really engage and participate in this future that is coming. So, am I optimistic? Yes, I am, because I believe in the fundamental values that motivate us. And if we stay true to them and act from them and learn and create things that are beautiful, because I really don't believe we need crappy things in the world, then we can have a really amazing impact. So thank you. I want to thank, by the way, a lot of my peers. I didn't get to where I am being brilliant on my own. And I want to echo what Rafa was saying. At the beginning, being a great leader is only possible if you have a great team that follows. And so everything he said, really take that to heart, because I couldn't have done what I did at Telefonica without amazing people. So I believe this is question and answer. I didn't see anybody waving furiously at me, so hopefully I was slow enough. Any questions? Please say who you are and what year you're in.
Okay, I'll try to. Does this work? Yeah.
Yes.
My name is Jesus. I'm a student of the UX Master. I'm a student of the UX Master in the first year. One question regarding the last picture you showed, we're in the 2030. Do you think that due to all the things happening today in San Francisco and all this sociopathy that it's being pointed at by a lot of designers, actually, we're getting to a point of actual damage control, or then a point of actually being able to choose which path do we want to choose?
I don't know that we're in damage control yet. I don't know if there will ever be a chance to have damage control. I think the world is going to continue to evolve. The more we engage, when we engage in all the little ways that we can, I think we'll have an impact. People aren't intentionally trying to do bad things or, create artificial intelligence that's not helpful. I think it is the example around the machine learning I think it was in 2015, where Google had to apologize because they had launched a automatic photo tagging algorithm that caused a bit of hoopla, because in one person's picture of two African-American friends, they were tagged as gorillas. That's a really bad oversight. Will it happen? Yes. But I think it's also just not really thinking about humanity as a whole, because we're designing things globally. And not everything looks like Silicon Valley, thank goodness. So I think it's an interesting set. I'm sure China will have its own version that will be really, really interesting, because they're doing amazing things and they will have a very different worldview. How that all will play out, I don't know yet. I don't think we'll know, but I think we can't wait to figure out when it's played out. We need to engage now. Other questions? Is this like really strange world? Are you guys reading about any of this, or is this really like new? By the way, I didn't talk about all the scientific developments that are going on, which I did yesterday, which is a bit like there's brain-machine interfaces are here and coming. So there's a lot of other parts of this that is happening. Is a cyborg. Absolutely, you need to look him up, Neil Harbison. I heard him speak at the Me Convention. He's the first official passworded cyborg. He has an antenna implanted in his head with which he can see, because he's born with a inability to see color. And the color waves are translated into sound, so he can now see color through the sound that he hears. And he's a very big proponent that we as people need to have the human right to be able to add intelligence to ourselves and expand our abilities through implants. Really great, look him up.
I would say, because we're at the university, and I think most of the talk has been a lot about the professional world and the exciting things that happens once you are already a designer. Maybe your thoughts on what's the role of academia in that landscape.
Well, academia does play an important part. I mean, for one thing, I'm still very much involved with my alma mater, the Institute of Design, and I keep telling them they need to do more to train designers to be ready for a world where you'll be solving design problems that we probably don't know yet what they are. So the academic world needs to prepare you to have fundamental skills and an ability to deal with ambiguity and problem solve, so that you can be designing something that I didn't even put up there probably in 5 years, 10 years. I think there was actually a statistic that said 40% of students today will be in completely different jobs in like the next 10 years, jobs that don't exist today. So I think that's a really important part. I also believe, when I come back to this idea of what's the problem is with corporation, or what I call corporate malfunction, universities can play a role in training the executives, because at the end of the day, real transformation companies will have to happen from the top down as well as from the bottom up. So there's an opportunity for universities to also extend the training programs to the more management and executive level, which I think is pretty important. I think a couple of schools are doing that in the United States, and I think that's a really important part of it. And then publication. Really getting the stories out of what's really important. So that to me are sort of three areas that is an important part of what a university's role is in making this happen. And to the degree that a design school can really also give you the chance to collaborate with people who are engineers in an engineering program and a business program, people who are dealing with some of these amazing scientific artificial intelligence topics. That's part of what I can really see as an important part, giving you the opportunity to learn here so that you can have some knowledge when you go into these companies and really say, wait a minute, the problem really starts somewhere very different.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Giancarlo. I'm a student from the Master of UX. And my point is, I was wondering, like, what's the law side of things? What's the legislation? Are there people actually, like, making laws? Because all the information right now, like, right now we have a lot of information, right? A lot of data. But in the future, there will be even more and more. So basically, public information, personal information is becoming public in a way. So have there been any issues regarding like law or maybe some or people that are actually driving or doing something or asking questions? What about personal information? What about privacy?
There is a whole army of people busy writing regulations and setting standards, and I didn't talk about this at all. Germany is actually a really interesting country because they probably have by far the strictest rules about personal data. You really have to actually hold your own personal data because they have to delete information, like bank information is only good for 6 months, and then it's no longer online. So they have the strictest laws. So yes, there are laws written. There's a lot of discussions around ethics. There are people who believe that all of this artificial intelligence is going to ruin humankind. I mean, there's real debate about that as well. So yes, there are lots of really important dialogues, and there will be lots of regulations. I mean, even the autonomous car, self-driving car businesses, we don't have the rules yet of what does it actually mean to drive vehicles like this, let alone what vehicles can drive there, and that's all really just now happening, and debates are quite extensive and heavy. And the regulatory environment will do a lot to shape what will happen. So they play a not insignificant role in shaping the future. There's some interesting conversations where designers are getting involved in governments, which is a whole other area. We heard about that at the Service Design Network, because governments really need a lot of design help, quite frankly. So I think those are also areas that we need to look at as designers and really influence how those organizations that shape our cities and our lives, how they're thinking about this. Somebody in the back? Right in the very back here.
Okay, I don't really know how to say this, but
can you say your name and which year in the program?
I'm Pablo. I study graphic design and multimedia creator, 4th year.
Okay.
Okay, so we've talked about technology and engineering and design and the mix of it. But how do you take the design or the value of the designers nowadays in a companies who cannot offer or cannot pay for this technology or for this kind of services? Yeah, kind of something like that.
So let me see if I understand. Your question is,
like how
being a designer in a company that doesn't have deep technology.
Yeah, probably. Or the technical solutions, kind of.
Well, if there are no engineers, then the problems that you're solving may not require that. I think most companies have engineers somewhere, whether or not it's dealing with the IT programs, or building, working on some parts of the infrastructure, which might affect you, if you're trying to actually impact a marketing site, and they put all sorts of rules and regulations in place on what you can and cannot do, and how people need to log in. I mean, there's usually, even with something very simple, you can suddenly have people come up and prevent you from actually doing the right thing. So I assume if you're in a situation where that is not part of your problem, then you really are dealing with maybe other technologies that come from third parties, or it has more to do with the output, with printing and with other technologies.
No,
So
kind of, it's like CX consulting,
mhm.
but we also have sometimes like a UX projects, but we don't have like the I don't know how to say resources to develop like design project kind of, to develop the last designer work. It's more like analytic work than design. And I think a lot of companies here in Spain, they are not as big as other ones, and they cannot afford it. They cannot do that.
Well, you need to figure out who are the people who you need. So first of all, what's the problem you're trying to solve, right? And what information do you need? If there's no engineer on the client side or in your team, then figure out how you get to be smart enough. What is it that you need to know, and who can help you with that, right? Because if you're as a consultant, if you come up with a solution and you don't have engineers, but the client has engineers, they're going to shoot that out of the water immediately if you're not able to answer all of their concerns in the solution that you're producing. And in most of these, when you start talking about small teams and small teams even developing solutions, some of these startups, you don't have an army of people at all. You might just have 2 or 3 with very specific expertise. And you might be the only designer, or maybe there's 2. Maybe it's not engineering. Maybe you need to be dealing with data science. Maybe your space is actually dealing with data scientists and researchers to make sense of what is the information that you're gathering, and maybe it's not engineering. So the key piece is not engineers. The key piece is who are the people who you need to have informing your problem solving and your design.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I guess. Totally. Thanks.
Okay.
Given how design is such an...
What's your name?
Oh, Amaya, and I'm in 3rd year of product design.
Okay, cool.
And given how design is so important in our society, and it may not be part of the culture in many areas because people have to learn about it still and integrate it in our organizations as a strategic element. Once artificial intelligence, which is probably going to be developed anyway, regardless of the polemic or against it. Once it's developed, how will designers, which are human and have mistakes and take time to solve problems, how will we keep up with that after it's developed? Because with algorithms, it can create, for example, structures that are imitating organic engineered forms that people with that type of knowledge would take 10 times that time to develop it. And will they become creative? Will we still have a job? How will the world be once artificial intelligence exceeds us?
Hopefully it will never quite exceed us. But it will play an important role. And I think it will change what we design and how we design. There is a fair amount of dialogue about automation of certain basic design rules and algorithms, right? I think that alone that needs to be shaped. Actually, what's the design of these patterns? What's the design of these rules? And there has to be some level of input to define that. But I wouldn't worry about that taking a particular job away. Your job will probably be solving way more significant problems. Because what we're going to start to need to look at is what is this technology base and how does it enable interactions and conversations and both internal within companies and external with customers. And those problems are going to be significantly bigger than necessarily the individual pattern. Now also the world isn't static, so I think we're going to continue as humans to come up with new ways in which to do things that might get it back embedded into the artificial intelligence of machines. I think we need to look at this technology more as part of our co-creation if you will. We're going to be working with whatever these algorithms, whatever this intelligence is. That's going to be part of the material that we need to use and manipulate and form into the experiences that we want to be creating. So it becomes an input. I encourage us to be involved in the creation of some of this, because it makes it easier or harder for us, to deal with what the technology is coming out of the APIs and the platforms. But if you don't get involved in that, or hope somebody else is involved in it, you'll be working with it as part of the materials that we have. How to keep up with the learning? I really believe there's a lot about artificial intelligence that we haven't figured out even how the brain works, let alone trying to figure out how to program something to imitate us. So I don't have all the answers and what that will be in 15, 20 years. But if you can be in the conversations, into the awareness, into the learning of it now, you'll know what it is that you're going to be needing to do in 20 years when you get there. Anything else?
I'm Anna. I'm from the Masters. I don't have a voice. My question is more to probe a little bit about the podcasts that you've mentioned several times. I was kind of curious to know if you could recommend anything to us, and for those of us in the Masters also who are going to be looking maybe for internships or jobs here in like 10 or 11 months. What are some things, maybe apart from reading, studying, of course, and listening to podcasts? Like, what are some other recommendations you have for us to kind of help stay ahead of the curve?
This works for me, but I've learned that I can only read so much. I actually need peers to talk to. I don't really absorb half of what I'm reading unless I can really communicate. The world of meetups is alive and well. So find out, go join different communities, and don't be afraid to be the only designer in the room. Go to a meetup around artificial intelligence, or go to meetups around data, where people might be talking really geeky around data science. But expose yourself to them and then really learn from that. And in that you have a social, the social component. You meet people, and they can potentially be people who accompany you through your long journey in your career, and because they're developing expertise in different space, it's a co-learning, if you will. So those would be one thing to do. Figuring out projects. Are there some even experiments that you can do, on your own with a peer group that is interested in figuring out the same thing? I've been really intrigued by conversations I've heard from some of my friends in Silicon Valley, where people sort of just believe that they can just do their job and do their job from 9 to 5, and that's sort of it. And that you can't do that. When I was just fresh out of school, we had lots of topics we didn't know anything about. And the way we learned is we spent our own time, trying to figure some of these things out, or we figured them out together, and we did a little project and we did a little prototyping. And I do believe that's part of how you can continue to grow. You need to be curious and believe in it, and then invest some of your time, and then find an environment or find that first job where you can really learn something very specific and do it until you're done with that. And if the organization is all screwed up, maybe that's okay, because what you're learning in the role that you have is exactly what you feel that you need to be learning right now. So those are the things that I can think of right now. High resolution, those are the YouTube videos, and they're also podcasts. Interesting people. Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me here. It was really wonderful to think about what I can share with you, and I hope it was useful and optimistic enough. So, thank you.